Welcome back to Highway Through Health. We're not a crisis line, we're not a therapy show, and we're not licensed healthcare providers. What we are is a place where lived experience is taken seriously because too many people have discovered the more clearly they speak, the worse they're treated. We share personal experience not to give medical advice, but so that when people encounter the kinds of situations we discuss, they're ready to recognize patterns and respond effectively. This show is about language, power, and what happens when systems stop listening and start translating people into problems. If you've ever felt misheard, mislabeled, or punished for staying coherent under pressure, you're in the right place. So today, got a big
Right.
topic. There's a ton of linguistic baggage around what we're going to talk about, but I think if we can try and summarize it, it really gets to the point where uncertainty is quite exhausting, and certainty, especially when you're in the midst of so much uncertainty, is what really comes around to stabilize this. How do you feel about that?
I absolutely agree. It comes from having a certainty in a power greater than ourselves, as they'll often put it in 12 step, and not reliant upon what somebody how could somebody else know ourselves better than God and
Right.
better than ourselves? And that would always be a question, and really to have that taken away from, the idea that somebody else would have agency over us, and unearned control and power, to have that disappear, and to realize within ourselves that gnosis, as they put it, the Gnostic Gospels, that gnosis, and that connection with God, with the higher self, and knowing that with certainty, um makes a huge difference. And while that may upset the folks who would rather be puppeteers and pulling the strings, and finding some sort of perverse profiteering or whatever it is they may get out of that, when they realize that their power has been diminished, and returned to us as individuals, that may upset them, but that's just really too damn bad, you know.
I feel the same way. I mean, I described that place as a circular room where all doors led to the same place, and it
Yes.
felt like, you can't get out. Everything's collapsing, your body's dissolving. There's no cure. All treatments have failed. There's really, what do you have left? And, it was about that time I was always terrible at growing plants. They died, I killed them way easier than I grew them. So I took up an interest in growing plants, and there was something about that whole process, learning how they work, the
Yeah.
chemistry, what do they need, what do they don't need. The first several times it was absolute disasters, everything died. And then I started getting better, then I started getting better, then I started getting better. And it really was that in the midst of nothing else going on that kind of started getting my attention away from the misery, the constant misery anyway.
Right.
And I think it's really necessary because this is sand, that's topsoil, that's a dead plant, that's a live plant. When everything's torn away, it was really that degree of certainty that needed to be interjected into my life anyway, for me to start to begin to stabilize again.
Yeah. When you have a concentration towards life, towards creation, towards growing something, towards a positivity, as I've heard it said, where focus goes, energy flows. And to be able to take that away and take that energy away from the negative, away from the suffering, and put it towards creating something, to add a positivity, to the world, um, to other people's lives. I mean, for me, it was having my cats at that time, but also it was about creating, it was about writing, it was about bringing laughter and joy and things that made me laugh, and things that I hoped would make other people laugh, and writing music reviews and things like that, and to be able to share my love of something that maybe other people hadn't heard of, but to help bring that out to other people and say, hey, this really matters to me, this brings me joy, this is somebody who deserves some attention for creating something that's very real, and very connecting. And it really is in being able to put that energy towards something other than perpetuating more suffering.
Mm,
And it does make such a huge difference. And and even though at that point it wasn't removing the pain I was in or the issues I was having, it was at least giving me something to focus on, that was positive, again, bringing something positive in the world as opposed to just sitting around and suffering and complaining about my pain. Well, I'm not really a big complainer, but just sort of, marinating on that,
right.
instead of doing something that could add something else,
Absolutely.
and being able to find that connection with say fellow music fans or Simpsons fans or anything like that, it makes a huge difference. It really
Yeah.
does.
I told a doctor once, and I don't think I really kind of got through very well, but I told her that, when all that's going on, if you have absolutely nothing to do, then that morphs into a kind of a pain that you can't drug away. And it's a
Right.
sense of misery. And I know that just because we were suffering, we've been in that place. I know there's lots of other people in that state right now. And so hopefully our discussion today will help people get an idea of kind of what we had to do to get out of it. But I can say that adding that level of certainty and coming off of our discussion last week about discernment and how all that matters, and it's that stabilizing force. This is a seed. This is the plant it's from. This is what it's going to do, and it's up to you to create the conditions for it to thrive. And when it's thriving, then the whole environment is in better shape, and when it's not, it's not. So that really was kind of an all-encompassing distraction for me in the beginning. I would say, these immersive experiences that we talk about, those will cure anything. The problem with those is we can't give you a prescription for them. We can't say go have one over here at this place right here. You can go experience that right now. I think that's coming in our future, but as it stands right now, we have to deal with the pathways. So getting to the pathways, I was that's kind of where the whole thing is. And it gets back to that notion, I guess, of being dead in sin, right? Because you don't know what you have inside of you until it hits you. And when it does hit you, then you can handle pretty much anything that's thrown at you.
Oh,
But
yes.
until it hits you, you're still in that circular room and you're looking for a way out. And so what we're trying to say is if we would do a better job between the way we structure recovery, the way we structure people who are struggling with internal, you know, things that make them want to harm themselves, hurt other people, just basically not be part of this world, then we can't fix that without some kind of purpose and some kind of factual purpose, getting into those people's lives. We can't drug them and stick them in front of a TV and expect them to get better. It won't happen. I tried that.
Yeah.
It didn't work. It just didn't
No.
work.
No, and I don't understand, if you're trying to tell people, oh, say no to drugs and all this. Well, then why in the hell are you trying to replace one drug with another drug that's far more dangerous, far
Right.
more debilitating, that
Yeah.
literally is designed in part to cause brain damage? It is just completely illogical and nonsensical.
Yeah.
The idea that you really should want to put people in a way to process that trauma, get it out of the body. We do know about these things at this point.
Yep.
There is an understanding of epigenetics. There is totally a much better way of going about it. We know the value of mindfulness. We have Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. We have people like Dr. Joe Dispenza, Greg Braden, who really explain this on in such a beautiful practical sense.
Yes.
And this is where things need to be. We do know that there are success stories with this. And the profiteers and the liars and the traffickers and abusers need to get the hell out of the way, and let people like ourselves with lived experience start taking this over, start being able to encourage other people and to put in place a framework for mindfulness so that people never have to get to the points that we did. That
Right.
would, as long as we can help people heal from the damage like we had from several different things that had been done to us. And God knows, there are far too many people out there right now who are suffering from the effects of all these neurotoxic poisons, as well as recovering from electrocutions, aka ECT,
Mhm.
um, and other things that could be much better handled with ketogenic diet, with better nutrition, with energy work, with being able to teach people the power of their own body to heal. And it can be done, and mindfulness is part of it. Spirituality and that reconnection is a huge part of it. Consciousness plays a major role. So being able to show people that yes, this actually works. And as you said so brilliantly before, Michael, we don't want people to have to get to the points that we were at.
No.
Um, it matters that yes, we've had death and near death experiences, and the things that we have gone through are, can be it's something that people get a little surprised at maybe, but they actually happen, and they've happened to far more than just us. But if we can help people to attain and maintain their own health without having to go to those extremes, then that would be the goal that we have. And the
Right.
fact that we can say, listen, miracles do happen. We're two of them. Let's help one another achieve this to make a better world altogether.
I agree. As I think, when it gets back to this topic of dead and sin, and there's probably two books in the Bible, if you're not really familiar with them, Isaiah and Jeremiah. Those two, that's what it's all about. It talks about it at an organizational level, at a governmental level, at an individual level, how it gets to the point where distortion becomes normalized. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now. And what we were going through was kind of a deconstruction of that normalization of distortion. We didn't know it at the time, but that really was what was going on. I didn't realize that a harsh environment really is not the same thing. It really doesn't mean a bad thing. It makes
Right.
you reach a lot deeper, that's for sure.
Yes.
And we hope to give you a little bit of insight into that too, how deep that really goes. But the honest feedback, the cause and effect, that has got to be a huge, huge part of what you're doing,
Yeah.
just because of the stability. And I think what really kind of, if I could relate one thing, treatment for this disease is brutal. You get sick a lot. And in the outset, I was getting sick all the time until I got off tramadol, until I fixed my painkillers, until I got off of a number of other things that would cause, drug interactions. I would get just retching sick. This would go on for, you know, half hour, 45 minutes, and it was usually a one or two time a day episode. It's not fun at all. But I remember one time I'm getting sick, I'm throwing up, I'm retching in there, and I felt this voice, and it said, get up, there's nothing wrong with you. And then
Yeah.
this almost like a vision popped in of me being kind of like in a bird's nest, and where I really was at that moment was a little bird looking for food. And when you think of how the depth of that, you can kind of get a feel for the magnitude of the emotions that you start wrestling with. And it was that level of defiance. If somebody was said, when did, you start getting communication? It was probably then. That was the communication that burns through everything. That was the communication that would eventually bait me out into the woods. That was, when something's so strong, it reaches you in a moment of that kind of vulnerability and sickness, there's something to it. And so this is
Okay.
not something, if I were talking to a doctor, it would be, so that's when your schizophrenia began. No, that's not it at all. So that's another reason why we're starting to talk about these things, because then you realize, wait a minute, that was an emotion that I can pick up and use. That
Yes.
wasn't just a random event. It wasn't a chemical reaction. It wasn't mental illness talking to me. It was get up and use this because you're going to need it. You're going to need it from this point forward because you're going to unlearn everything that you were ever taught, and you're going to do it one day at a time under a lot of pressure and a lot of intensity. So that's kind of if you get a sense for intensity
Yeah.
and you wonder why people express themselves very intensely when they're going through this, it doesn't surprise you or I, but I think it would surprise a person who's not gone through something like this.
Yeah, I would agree. Because some of that is just so, and like I said, for me, they were torturing me in order to study all this kind of thing. So I've backtracked and gotten a lot of different books and things so that I can put it into my own perspective and then explain it to other people. Um, because going toward what you had said, that intensity and things. I don't want people to mistake that. We're meant to have intense emotions. Experiences like that are meant to be transformative. They are meant to be deeply emotional. They are meant to give you a far deeper understanding. And like we had said before, that used to be part of a church. That used to be part of the church. That used to be a part of religious ceremonies. Still is within indigenous communities. It's just something that the mainstream has really sort of pushed away because they want to be able to insert themselves between each congregant or each person and God, and they have no business doing that. Just the way psych has no business doing that.
Exactly.
Nobody has any business doing that. Period. That's not intended. That's evil. That's the devil inserting himself. Uh, that's people's egos getting the best of them, and wanting to place themselves on a pedestal. It's not earned. It doesn't belong there. Um, and yeah, it is an intense situation, and it needs to be understood as a spiritual transformation. It needs to be understood as a transformative event. People's spirits we're meant to kind of crack open that sort of egg or cocoon and have that deeper understanding and have that greater light shine through to our souls so that we are meant to do that. We are meant to go to that next level of spiritual understanding of ascension. That's what people are meant to do, and that is where I feel we're at really as a collective at this point. We've heard it said that this spiritual warfare going on, and there really is. There's been just an ungodly amount of evil, which always morphs. It never disappears. It morphs into, and mutates in dark corners until it becomes very apparent once again. And God needs to take and put that bright light through each of us as individuals. Um, because Jesus was but one person, but even in the Bible, we hear where he has said, you will do even greater things. Or I can't
Right.
remember the exact quote, but that we are all meant to do that. That he was showing us the
Right.
way. That's why they call Jesus the way. That we are meant to follow that. We each have our own individual crosses to bear, and it's in how we pick them up and work through that. Each as individuals with the challenges and things that we have set up with God, how do we are able to meet and overcome them. And it is very important, and at this point very relevant for people to know that, be aware of it, and have this understanding of what is actually happening. That we are meant to create, we're meant to be creators, we're meant to have art and expression and connect in those ways with emotionality, with a sense of depth and emotionality, and whether that's through music, comedy, plays or sculpture or painting or whatever it may be. It matters. It matters that we are connecting as human beings on that level, that we connect to nature, we connect to other parts of creation and creatures. It's a necessary thing. We're supposed to be stewards of the earth. We're supposed to nurture and caretake. And I think for far too long we've had an opposite sort of imbalance of power going.
Right. We've been told, the amount of distortion in our lives is a, is a, some kind of a milestone that represents how much spiritual things that we've achieved. And we're talking, this is not prosperity gospel, as we've said before. This is kind of completely the opposite, where this is really kind of getting to what some people would call the Dunning-Kruger effect, when you have a defect in your ability to evaluate feedback, then you tend to make decisions that aren't in your best interest. And as we talk about discernment, as validating that feedback, the plant issue, having these really firm, you know, things in your life, one step will lead to a next, will lead to a next. You learn discernment. Even
Yes.
plants don't come up, something went wrong. I either
Yes.
didn't fertilize them, I planted them at the wrong time, I got the wrong seeds. Go figure out what happened. And so success was a um, experience in immersion, and failure was an experience in immersion. Both of them had their equal kind of lessons, and so I learned them and just went along with it. And so I'm pretty well convinced, just in my experience, that the stability matters. It matters a whole lot. It
Oh,
matters
yes.
more than
Yes.
most people like. And so when we start talking about moving it into what's going on with structurally, how do you help people that are stuck in these places? What we're trying to do is, again, give you an idea of the power of the emotions that have to be used to get out of these places. I mean, if I had to start becoming defiant over having a retching session that's going to go on for an indefinite period of time, that's down to the point where emotions quit moving. That's what you're going to do. You're going to do that. You're going to do that no matter what comes at you. That's just it. It's kind of like a mini death. You're kind of dying into that level of defiance that you're not going to let that part of the disease define you anymore. And as the discernment comes up, you have other things that start filling the gap as you're pitching these other things out. So
Yeah. Yeah, a lot
it's
of times it is about how energy gets moved out of the body and all of that. I mean, it really is that. I remember one time quite distinctly, uh, that because my nerves damage and everything, you talk about alignment, my spine was out of alignment. And I do have a scoliosis as well, and it's mild, thank God, but it definitely affected me. And at one point, with all the nerve damage and everything else and not being able to walk, I was in so much pain one time, and I know that I have an allergy, I guess you'd call it, to ibuprofen. It literally will make me really quite sick. But I was desperate enough and in enough pain because I'd had a slipped disc, that I took it. And instead, what I ended up doing was retching so bad that it ended up that eventually I was dry heaving. Then I was throwing up blood, and my disc slipped again, and I was like, oh dear Lord, what in the world am I going through this for? And
right.
I mean, it was just, I had tears rolling down my face. It was like, I even when I couldn't imagine even worse physical pain, I mean, there that was. And the truth is, when you're in that kind of physical pain, the best, even like what the strong opioids might do, they maybe will alleviate it for a certain period of time, but they do not eliminate it.
No.
So for me to have had a miracle to where, eventually to have all of that have moved out of my body. And I'm sorry again that people shouldn't have tried to sabotage it. That's a problem they have. That's a them problem, not a me problem.
Right.
Um, and that's a serious one, but God will deal with them. As far as it goes for me, to be able to have that miracle is just, it really is mind blowing, which is why I try to, now understand and really undertake a deeper understanding of what people were misusing so that I can use it to the positive. That I'm better able to kind of explain how energy works. I know my own story well enough to be able to say I knew that I had trauma trapped and stored in my body. I knew at a point, and I had known for a while that that there was something that wasn't quite right with my ex. I just didn't realize just how wrong it was. I didn't realize he was part of a band of traffickers. I didn't realize I'd essentially been sold to him for research purposes. I mean, I know that now. I'm not going to say that there's ever going to be a time where It doesn't hurt to a certain degree, but I'm a lot happier now. I'm living in actual truth. I'm living in alignment. I understand how we all plan our lives with God. I'm living my purpose, and as they would put on The Simpsons, that ain't not bad. I mean, I'm real pleased about that. I'm in a
Right.
place. I'm living with wonderful people. My landlord is spectacular. I love being able to rent from a private home owner. And this is a wonderful neighborhood. Only been here for a little while, but I really love it. And I
Great.
feel so comfortable here. And to be able to be rebuilding my life, and now to be able to, extend that out to, doing networking, doing this show. I love it. Love being able to spend time with you every week. Love being able to share our stories with people. And to be able to help people, again, attain and maintain health, without the pills, without the drugs, how to recover from addictions and other things that are just unhealthy. It means so much to me. And if that's how, what God had put me through all of that, to be able to expose so much of a deeply entrenched kind of evil, then I'm good with that. I can take those memories and make it into something different. I'm not going to hold on to, I don't have any bitterness or hatred towards anybody. Um, I, I just never have. I don't even really use that word hate. It just isn't part of my vocabulary. Um, and just in being able to have like forgiveness, yes, of course I want people to be held to account for what they intentionally did, what they perpetrated, and they knew they were doing this with bad intent. Of course I want them held to account, but I don't have any bitterness over it. Um i'm you know I, i'm just very grateful to be in the position and the place where I am now. And I would hope that, being able to kind of show to people how spiritual growth works, what purpose is, how pain can then drive that kind of collapse that we were talking about, that collapse of a phony framework.
Yep.
That being dead to sin is, it's like the Bob Dylan song, you got to serve somebody. Well, eventually, that when that ego collapse happens, when those false constructs collapse, you do find yourself saying, okay, God, how do I now, build and rebuild a life that's sensible, that's positive, that I'm living in a purpose that isn't a phony construct, that isn't built there, to serve a false construct or something worldly, or worshiping the golden calf, because it's what we see around us far too much. They try to convince us to chase, some weird notion of prestige or whatever, through a lot of false, phony, I don't know. I don't give a damn how much somebody has in their bank account. What do you have in your spiritual account? What do you
Right.
bring to the table with your actual self, with your soul? What are you really adding to, are you following actual values in the world? Not what your
Hmm.
value is, on a bank book, but what are your values? Do you go out of your way to make people feel good, to make them feel better about themselves, putting something positive and genuine and real out there, making emotional connection, being honest with yourself and being able to say, hey, I hurt, or hey, this feels good. That all matters. That
It
matters.
does.
That genuine integrity of self, of truth, of really wanting something that's more substantial than some sort of flash and dazzle bullshit.
Right.
That's there for 5 minutes. Oh, you wear a designer label. I don't give a rat's ass. Who cares?
Exactly.
Who are
Yeah,
you
and
there to impress?
excuse me. And when you're
Mhm.
talking about structural blindness, I mean, you can, looking at how many problems that we have that really are based on that kind of structural blindness, which is a complete failure of feedback to let people become aware of what it is we're really facing, what someone's really struggling with. It's easy to just say, well, here, I'm going to throw a pill at you and tell you to just take that and move on. And that's not going to help get us out of the things that we were into. I mean, again,
No.
it didn't help me one bit. And I didn't realize how much I had to learn. So when it comes to that whole structural blindness thing and how much do you have to unlearn? Well, for me, it was everything. And I'd done what everybody else did. Went to college, I got a degree, I had a job, I did all that kind of stuff. I got sick. And then, and for me, it wasn't even calling out for a higher power. This just came out to just be endurance, which is, I think, is why my experience was completely unexpected in that Isaiah 65 kind of context where it just comes smacking you out of nowhere because you're just, you don't know what that is. And I had so many false ideas of what faith was and what faith did. And most of them came from ungrounded definitions of that word that didn't have any kind of discernment tied to it. That was more tied to look how silly I am. That must mean I'm faithful. And no, that's not working with me because I was into this fact thing. And so I know people were probably trying to tell me things, but the language came out in a way that there was just absolutely no way I could accept it. I mean, I never would have thought, oh, you just have to take the literalness a little bit farther to really find out what they're talking about, because you got to break through that structural blindness, that system, whatever it is. And sorry that we don't have the vocabulary for all this because it's not a topic that's really well discussed. I mean, how do you say, what is that energy that allows you to break through that? I know it came from outside of me because it was way bigger than me. It wasn't anywhere near my size. It was
Yeah,
way bigger than what I was, way bigger. And
yeah,
so making contact with that, and it only exists in a factual environment. The Holy Spirit doesn't deal in lies. So this is another reason why you have to have that fact-based layer going in there. If you don't, and if you don't cultivate that fact-based um, kind of evaluative process, then you're constantly going to be going off in the weeds. And so now, when it's explained in that kind of a level, after I've had the benefit of being sick and after I had the benefit of going through the rebirthing experience, then it all made sense. But up until then, it didn't.
yeah.
So,
I think sometimes it can be helpful to kind of explain to people in a way like that the way electricity is, that kind of energy, that we are a conduit. um you can lok at it as we are both broadcasters and receivers. So we could think of each of ourselves as maybe a radio station or a radio. We're here to receive that energy and translate it through whatever channel we may be. And they call people channels, and that really, I think, is a kind of one way of being able to help people put that into a certain kind of context. Because energy and electricity exist outside of that. The cord isn't the energy, it's the conduit. When we turn on a TV or a radio, that's translating what's being sent, but it's not the actual show itself.
right.
And I think that maybe people can kind of wrap their heads around it a little bit more that way if they look at it that way. We aren't this experience. It's like when we dream, this is a partial experience. This, what we are as awake, but we only bring a certain percentage of our own selves, of our own soul, into this body anyway. I think they said it is maybe something like 30%. The rest is at that higher plane that constantly resides with God, because we are eternal energy. So the rest of that is at a higher plane, and we animate ourselves each day, and then when we sleep, we kind of return to that. Um, and and that's that recharge. It's that refresh. So sometimes I think people kind of need to wrap their heads a little bit more around the body isn't the only thing. This is, what we have for this particular sort of adventure on Earth. This particular earthly adventure, we have this particular body for that, but our energy is eternal. So it sometimes can help people to realize that, we are actually a conduit for something much larger than ourselves.
I agree. I think what helped me too was thinking that these emotions are out there, they're real, they exist. And you could come in contact with them. And when you're centered, you can deal with them.
Yes.
If I would have known that you didn't have to wait for your body to die, that would have made a completely different, that would have had a completely different effect on how I looked at what those words were, what they meant, what they were trying to tell somebody to do. I didn't know. I didn't know until it happened. And so that's why we're not trying to build cults, and we're not saying listen to us. We're saying experience it yourself. This is about empowerment.
Right.
It's about, look, take some of these emotions and realize you can set those things in motion in a way that defies your obstacles. And for me, you've felt this. I'm sure that if this were a widely studied phenomena, you'd start finding more people would start reporting that same thing. So when we come to these people that are stuck in these hellish emotional states where they want to harm themselves or they want to lash out at others or they need constant affirmation or they're just going to go absolutely berserk. This isn't about constant affirmation. This is, you're a child of God, you're part of the universe. There's nothing to affirm you above and somebody else, so there's really nothing to get upset
Right.
about. And so much of it changes. And which is why the intensity, when I see people getting called paranoid or schizophrenic or something like that, it just burns me today because I know that
Right.
person is probably sensing an emotion that's way more powerful than anything that person observing them can possibly imagine or feel at the moment. There's a reason for it. There's a context that they need help getting into. And if they got more help getting into that particular context, they could be more functional. Otherwise, they're going to sit in that circular room spinning in circles over and over and over again, not knowing how do I get out of this, thinking that there is no way out of this, and
Right.
the your future from this point forward is to just suffer as gracefully as possible until you finally die, which is absolutely no way to live. And kind of the point of
No.
what we're trying to tell people, I think, when we're doing this.
Yeah, it's like when you have a sore spot in a muscle, having to massage that spiritually to move that emotion out. And as somebody had put it, and I wish I could remember who right off the top of my head, but emotion is energy in motion. So an emotion is something that you feel attached to an event or attached to a person, what have you. And it's in being able to have the language and the ability to really examine that and feel it and allow certain things to move past, because generally when you have trauma which is stuck, uh that energy is probably hitting a sore spot, hitting something that you need somebody to help facilitate moving that out, moving that on, to help you figure out what is it that maybe God has a message for you about something that's happened or about a way of dealing with something, that has some kind of intensity that may be, within your past, that may be something that is, happening now that needs some really, attention in a way that isn't addressed traditionally, or that people have tried to mislabel for profiteering or whatever other kinds of purposes. I mean, there are people who are doing that don't want to address the issues in their own life,
Right.
and that's a them problem, and it shouldn't be anybody else's issue,
Hmm.
and we're here to be able to present not only our stories but further information so that people can then go and explore on their own. When we talk about like frequency, we're all made of frequency and vibration, so that resonance, as far as what's going to resonate, where that truth hits, where that sort of that bell ringing, like hitting tuning forks, what may be resonant for somebody else to help them process, to help them move that trauma and have that alignment and that reconnection with a greater spirit, with source, with God, with everything, and that certainty. As somebody put it, if you didn't, if you weren't meant to exist, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
So that energy, we as souls are all meant to be here. And sometimes just being able to come to terms with that, because no matter how we may have been mistreated by other people or made to be, made to feel, because of the cruelty of others, or that may have caused us trauma. It's like, how do we now be able to reframe that, um, to look at it in a different way, so that that kind of thing doesn't sort of pierce us at that point again. How do we then allow that to heal up? How do we open ourselves up to some kind of greater knowledge and gnosis in order to facilitate that healing and that reconnection?
Absolutely. Because, for me, I was on this path, honesty, the increase in honesty leads to the increase in discipline, which leads to an increase in coherence, which increases my ability to function. And to have that interrupted. So I'm not quite where you are with the kidnapping. I have not quite gotten over that because I don't think I will until there are some serious changes in just a number of things that surround that whole industry. And it's really too big of an issue to touch on right now. But I'll just say, absent regulatory changes, there's no reason to think that it can't, won't, and probably will happen again, especially given the profitability of that kind of behavior, the lack of risk. You can do that without getting sued, without, risking your reputation. This is what they do all day long. So nothing really matters, and nobody's going to investigate it. When things are like that, that's when I have a problem, and I'm not going to get over it. I don't think I will. I'm pretty sure I won't until I start seeing things like that change. And we're just not quite there. I see cracks here and there, but we're nowhere near to the point of making the regulatory changes that make sure this kind of stuff does not happen again. Because we've got an industry that's, and from our perspective, is functioning in that dead and sin environment. They have cut off communication. When you isolate yourself from what your patients are saying, how can you practice medicine? Well, psych does that. They do that all day long. And so when it comes to breaking this Dunning-Kruger effect, how are you going to do that when you're deliberately sabotaging your ability to get proper feedback because you're relying on a predisposed framework that might allow you to create billable events and stick a BMW in your driveway, but it's not doing that much for the patient. So it's separating those two things. And until that happens, and I don't see the industry really ready to do that anytime soon. I don't know about you. I don't see it.
Well, given the amount of fraud and what I experienced and reported, it's massive. It's a massive, massive amount of fraud, and I know that people are finding that within a lot of these criminal fraudsters in behavioral health, that they're committing flat out Medicare and Medicaid fraud. They've been caught with their hands in the cookie jar quite frequently, doctoring medical records. It certainly happened to me. I'd even
Yeah.
received notice about it, and I knew it happened, and I started reporting it to the proper authorities at the time it was going on, which is why I have unshakable faith. I know exactly what I've been through, and I feel good because I've been reporting it every step of the way. And that can be easily proven. Regardless, yeah, I don't have my notebooks, I don't have all that other things, but I know exactly what I went through. Wrote a 10-page plus letter to Social Security, have told all appropriate authorities, both Maryland state government and the FBI and other federal authorities and investigative people, who was responsible, and named names. And it's easy to look up that these folks are connected to indictments already. Well, what the hell were you doing having crooks and criminals work in the healthcare field anyway? And if you knew, now that lays on you. You know what I mean? And that's at a state level and a federal level. That's on them. And they knew. They knew. So for me, I have no I my push is not only exposing this stuff, but really building the alternatives that we're talking about, that are non-drug, non-coercive, and that's another issue too. Coercion is illegal now in the state of Maryland. Obviously, this happened after I left.
Nice.
But that should then, in and of itself, make coercive psychiatry completely illegal. Period. Doesn't make any sense. If you're, that means they are themselves indulging in known criminal and abusive behaviors. I mean, there's just no other way of putting that. Um, so for me to build up the alternative framework of things that we're discussing and what other doctors have talked about, again, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Joe Dispenza, a number of other people who work within that field of epigenetics and all, Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, the things they study over at Dobbs at University of Virginia. These are a number of things, and I've had the and some of these folks again that I reported in Maryland were caught manipulating information. They claim they've had hacks. It's not hacks. Hell, Hopkins even got caught talking to Russian spies. Maybe about a, I don't know, maybe about I think maybe a decade ago or something. But obviously, and then they've had hacks, but it is what it is. This is, in other words, though, it's provable fraud, sometimes involving international folks. One of the places in Maryland has international ties to other fraud in the UK, stock market shit going down. So it is,
Mm.
I know I don't feel uncomfortable with the things that I've been through and what I've reported. It's flat out fraud. And people want to clean up fraud. And I'm more than happy to be somebody who I would love to be able to speak with Secretary Kennedy about being able to move things in a direction of health for Maha and everything else, because I feel like he's been on the right path for many years. He's anti-corporate. He's fought against a lot of this stuff, a lot of these big pharma companies. So I feel very comfortable having him in place as somebody who's looking into health. And I would welcome an opportunity to speak about this at a national level. And I'm glad to be near DC. It
Yeah, you're
I
definitely
would
in the
be
right
more than
spot.
happy to help put together something. Yeah, absolutely. And I would be more than thrilled to help put together something that makes a lot more sense and gets rid of this fraud, gets rid of this insider trading, and a lot of things that I think we're already seeing coming to the surface. Certainly, this is some of the things that were in the Epstein files, and I think that's going to be a little more revealed too. Some of this stuff is really quite intensely involved with how to break people and a misuse of that kind of power and control. So,
Right.
um, we'll see what happens, but to be able to build the alternatives, I think that to make that easily available as frontline treatments, to have peer-run warm lines, for example, to have things led by people with lived experience, to be able, in order to combat some of this stuff, to have the entire disability community come together and really start making strides towards, okay, let's invest in our own communities. Let's, nothing about us without us. Let's have it where we can then buy some parcels of land or some homes and have it self-run, self-directed. Have people who want to deprescribe getting away from, whether it's street drugs, the big pharma drugs, any of that. Let's have people working together to help facilitate that. That's certainly an in demand, um, but certainly an in demand field at this point. So let's make that happen. Let's build these alternatives up and out, so that we're utilizing people with lived experience to actually help heal, as opposed to continuing to support a system that wants nothing more than to keep people sick and dependent. It doesn't
Right.
make any sense. That's a false narrative. That would also help facilitate bringing back actual jobs to people who have had lived experiences, whose lives have been damaged by the pseudoscience of psychiatry and the abuse of amoral practitioners within it. That we who have come through that and have survived that kind of abuse and that false pretenses can help one another, uplift one another, and build a network of support and strength that comes from a very organic thing. and in a
Right.
very spiritual context to help do things differently, to help build,
Because a
actually
good
make a better tomorrow.
absolutely, you're right. I mean, a good community can build all kinds of purpose in someone that doesn't have any purpose. And as a group, I think when I see the how it's structured today, where they'll lump in addicts with people who have, fetal alcohol syndrome, with people who have had, a bad car accident or something. There's no differentiation when it comes to purpose, behavior, belief systems, any of that kind of stuff. And so what you tend to have happen is these um, constant instigators, line steppers, antisocial kind of people start getting mixed in with these other people who've already been traumatized. So their home situation just becomes absolutely nutso. And so asking them to stabilize, or where do they even go and find a partner if my car broke down? Or hey, can I bum a ride from the store? Or can we pool our resources? Eating alone is
Yeah,
extremely expensive. If you can split your meals with somebody, that gets better.
yeah,
Another sense of community, another sense of purpose. And yeah, it's not going to cure everything that you're faced with, but when you start addressing those underlying causes of turmoil and dysfunction, at least gives people a place to start to stabilize and start to realize I've got to get in contact with these massive emotions. I got to start putting them in my life. I got to knock all this stuff, all these obstructions out of the way, which does pretty much mean you have to learn everything all over again. At least coming from the perspective of someone here born in 1962, growing up in America and seeing and living as I have through the time that I have. But it all had to be redone. And it's not, I
yeah,
know there are easier ways of doing this. And I don't want to see other people go through the upheaval, the transitions, the loss of friends, the all the misinformation that
yeah,
goes on, having people running around calling you crazy when you're not. There's nothing more isolating, I think, than some of these labels that they hand people because it automatically interrupts. You can't have a normal conversation at your doctor's office anymore. The minute that label shows up, that label never goes away. And so, can you have a conversation? No, I don't bring it up. Do you? I didn't. When I still see two doctors. I don't bring it up. I started to a little
I'm,
bit.
yeah, I'm not, yeah, I had, like I'd mentioned before, I had one good doctor who was very solid, understood where I was coming from, understood what I was dealing with, all that. I haven't seen him in a while, and like I had just spoken to somebody regarding benefits, and all this, and I said, listen, I said I have no interest anymore in seeing any allopathic doctors. I said it's not. I said it's just not for me. Um, I would at this, it's very few people at this point that I trust within that field at all. I would probably see like maybe a DO or something if I really, felt like there was something that needed to be addressed. But I, would really have to research and find people that have an actual recommendation. I'm just not all the fiction that's been written in my records and everything else. I'm not comfortable, and I feel like I'm in the best health of my life at this point. So, yes, I still have heart problems. Yes, I, would still have lupus. But and I'm always going to be autistic. Um, I don't find that, I'm trying to do something that works with that and not against it because that's just not going to do anybody any good. It's very stupid. Um,
Exactly.
and I did the best I could for multiple years, what they say with masking and everything else, but just like many autistics, I found myself, using substances
Mhm.
because it was just too fucking hard.
Yeah.
And I was caregiving for somebody that had their own issues, working 80-hour weeks, and it was just way too much. And now retail management isn't even necessarily an option anymore, not at the level it used to be. And the companies I work for have long since gone bankrupt. Um, but that's okay. I'd rather be doing what it is I'm focused on anyway. And that respects me, being autistic, coming to terms with that, and the sensory overload, and saying, you know what, I don't want anything that dulls it down or anything else. No, just because I'm perfectly stable, and when I'm in my own lane, I can do awesome shit, and I
Yep.
want to be able to focus on that to help other people. That is where I'm best utilized at this point. That is my purpose in life. So to be able to pursue that and help build things up in a better way, and give people this other perspective on what health is and how to attain and maintain it, uh, that
Absolutely.
matters. Um, I'm not trying to fit into some kind of false narrative anymore. I'm just not going to do it. Um, and I like being proactive about my health. I like using a ketogenic diet. In fact, my landlord is very into that too. So it's one of the things I've said. I'm looking forward to making kale chips and doing all this,
Nice.
kind of healthy cooking, and a burden shared is a burden lifted. So I do think that there should be some consideration in people who do have a natural vibe, who do have a natural who have been survivors, and we do have a natural affinity to be able to construct things like soteria houses and to be a peer network. And yeah, cohabitation is a great thing. You may have people who people who have skills in some ways and need help in others. They might be able to find a good fit, a good natural fit, and be able to solve a lot of these issues. Somebody that
Mhm.
knows how to cook healthy and do these things. To be able to cook for somebody who maybe just doesn't have the physical ability, at least not at the moment. um and build natural community, allow that to come back into fashion. And that can be easily, I think, is much more easily done at this point when people utilize things like social media and all these different things in the right way. I think that it
Right.
can be a great tool to help facilitate a lot of healing and a lot of promotion of positive things and moving forward and talking about the things that we're talking about, to help people get away from the negativity and that whole wheel of being sucked into a dark place that nobody needs to be.
Right. And I feel real bad for people stuck in those places because I was there, and he could argue I still am to a certain degree, but this is a process. We're going through this process. We keep going. It was a process that led from that retching event to the rebirthing event. That was
Right.
a process. It was a brutal, brutal process. But once that happened, then okay, so now I'm going to do this kind of a practice. We're going to keep it going, and we're going to see where it takes me or whoever else. That's what I do. So I feel good doing that. I don't really feel bad doing it. I don't like sitting around attacking the psych industry all the time, but at the same time, I was attacked. I was hauled into court, publicly ridiculed. There have been no apologies. There have been no changes to any kind of procedures. There's been no kind of changes to any kind of training manuals. And I'm not saying it needs to be done for me. I'm saying it has happened to way too many people. And I do these calls now
Yes.
and then, and you have these people get on there who will tell you how their lives suck, even though they're on this welfare program, they're on their psych drugs. And, it's a life of absolute hell that they're describing. And we know there's a way out, but that way involves purpose. And so when we have this dead in sin kind of organizational distortion that's been normalized in everybody's lives, breaking through that and getting through that is really, really difficult. But I think along with you, we have the money. It's being directed to the wrong people. It's not a funding issue. It's the
That's exactly right. That's it. It's going in the wrong place. You are exactly right, because what we're talking about is more effective, not only in terms of cost, but effective in terms of healing, effective in terms of actually helping people, and in terms of actually helping people move out of poverty, out of dependence, into something different. And that's another thing too. They need to be able to bring back and fund jobs that can pay a living wage. We need to have these folks who say that they're job creators create jobs here, actual jobs here. And that's
yeah,
going to help a lot too, because
and the
yeah,
whole pull you up
it
by your
not
bootstraps
having that
argument. But go
uh,
ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, it's the truth. They need to be able to contribute again in the way that they're supposed to be. If you're getting tax breaks for being a job creator, then for God's sakes, create some actual jobs here in the US.
Right. Yeah.
Help make made in America a thing again. That's very important. Quality matters. I remember when Sears Kenmore's lasted forever, so
Mm-hmm.
I there needs to be that consideration, because people definitely want to work, and they want to be able to not just survive but thrive. And being
Right.
able to contribute and do things, and to hold up, a garment or a lawnmower or whatever, and say, I made this. I made this here in America with, at a job that I'm proud of. It
Right.
matters. It absolutely
Yes.
matters.
Yes, it does. It makes a big difference. And yeah, I would rather be taking on corporate America than taking on the psych industry, but we'll do them one at a time because in a lot of ways the psych industry is
Yep.
tied into corporate America and it is tied into the way they
Big
think. And
time.
so in some ways we can kill two birds with one stone as we keep going through this and get it going. And I don't mean that violently. I'm meaning I want to permanently and completely disrupt the organizational inertia that's preventing necessary reforms, both at the training, the certification level, where this goes on in universities, what goes on in some of these institutions that are so eager to take away your civil rights in order to create billable events. And it's something that needs to be fixed. And we can't fix it fast enough, as far as I'm concerned at this point. Because, as you get into that word faith, faith is not discernment free. And when we're talking about this topic in
Right.
particular, we're saying you need to start developing these feedback mechanisms that we have not developed. We pressure people into going along with the way things are laid out, which is a great recipe for misery, but it doesn't really help you break through when you're stuck in that circular room.
Yeah. And when Jesus got mad, it was at the money changers in the temple. So our idea is that
Mm.
we're coming in to kick down something that is negative, negatory, profiteering, and actually building up something positive that celebrates individuals, celebrates people, celebrates life itself, and is life affirming, and faith affirming and spiritual affirming. Huge difference between, that celebrates getting trauma out and moving
Right.
on, as opposed to somebody who's profiteering by having somebody remain stuck, and miserable.
Absolutely.
That's not what life's about.
No, absolutely. Well, this has been an hour. This is an hour that's flown by. It's been a really good
Wow.
conversation. I really thank you for doing this with me, Dana. It's been a lot of fun. I'm
It's
learning a lot.
absolutely, it's my pleasure, Michael. I can't thank you enough for putting this together. It is just a joy every week, and I really do think we're making a huge difference.
Good.
Um,
We're gonna keep
yeah,
making a difference.
absolutely.
All right
Absolutely.
then. Well, thanks again, and I guess I'll see you next week. I'll get this put together as soon as I can. I'll try not to mess it up like I did last week. So I'll sort that out.
You'll be
So,
fine, hon.
all
You'll be
right.
fine. God
Take
bless.
care.
Enjoy your evening,
You
hon.
too. God bless you too.
You
We'll
too.
see you.
Much love.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye.